5 undeniable miracles in the Quran. Oh, I am so ready to have my mind blown.
If you're not Muslim and you're watching this, I just want to reach out to you and say, do you know what's the purpose of life?
The purpose of life is to make babies, eat snacks, argue on the internet, finish your Netflix queue, and occasionally wonder why the universe exists. But I'm guessing that's not the answer you're looking for. What you actually want is a religious answer. And that answer depends entirely on which religion you already believe in. In Islam, the purpose of life is to worship Allah. Do that correctly and you get eternal paradise. Don't do it, or pick the wrong religion, and then, by the boundless depths of His mercy and unmatched glory of divine infinite love, you are rewarded with eternal torture. In Christianity, the purpose of life is to glorify God and accept Jesus as your Savior because He died for your sins. Same structure, different logo. Believe correctly, heaven forever. Don't, eternal punishment. Sometimes fire, sometimes separation from God, which somehow still hurts forever. Branding varies by denomination, suffering does not. In Hinduism, the purpose is to escape the exhausting cycle of rebirth through enlightenment or karma, and so on. So when he asks, what is the purpose of life, he's not presenting evidence in the answer. He's presenting a theological conclusion that only makes sense after you've already accepted the entire belief system. Here's a good question. What is the purpose of life in heaven?
If you look at the purpose as presented by different isms, where it's either just do whatever you want or there is no purpose, then think about it. How valuable is life? And it would be wasted. But let me tell you about something, that there is a creator. One creator, the same creator that sent the message to Moses, to Abraham.
Yeah, we're gonna skip the preaching. We can come back to hear the theological sales pitch after he proves Islam is the only true religion, not just true to him.
And let me prove to you that it's a true message. Think about a man in the desert more than 1400 years ago who could not read or write, who had no training in philosophy or science, who had no access to any of that information, coming and presenting the orbits of the heavenly bodies.
Very impressive. If you ignore the fact that people in other ancient civilizations were also observing the stars, planets, and orbits long before and after him, and the fact that you don't need any training in philosophy or science to hear information from others, memorize it, and recite it back to people. Isn't that how he passed down Quran? Or even look up and see the sun and moon moving in their orbit? Like, did anybody ever question this information?
It tells us in the 21st chapter, in the 33rd verse, that all of the heavenly bodies, the sun and the moon, they have an orbit. How can a man in the desert, without telescopes, without that knowledge, know that? You cannot observe the orbit of the sun.
Wow, the sun and the moon, each traveling in an orbit. I wonder how he was able to say that general statement without training in philosophy and PhD in science, especially when orbit is a translation choice, not a scientific term.
The orbit is not the sun going across the sky in the day. That is the turning of the earth. The orbit of the sun is the sun's orbiting, which is something that is impossible to observe with the human eye.
Said no Muslim ever, before the 16th century, when Copernicus, Galileo, and Kepler finally developed the sun-centered model. When Muhammad himself asked, "Do you know where the sun goes?" he didn't say,
That is the turning of the earth.
He said this instead, "Verily, it, the sun, glides till it reaches its resting place under the throne. Then it falls prostrate and remains there until it is asked, 'Rise up and go to the place whence you came,' and it goes back and continues emerging out from its rising place." Now that part is really bad. The sun gets permission to come back up from its rising place, after it travels and reaches a resting place located under a throne. Truly remarkable. How did he possibly say all that nonsense without training in philosophy and science? About 7 centuries after Muhammad, Ibn Taymiyyah, a 14th century scholar, shows up to clarify what this orbit business really means. Keep in mind, this is the same guy who insisted the earth is round, based on the Quran and Hadiths, and the consensus of the Ummah. Surely he's here to set the record straight for us. Allah the Exalted said, "And he is the one who created the night and the day and the sun and the moon, each floating in an orbit." And he also said, "The sun is not permitted to overtake the moon, nor does the night outpace the day. Each is floating in an orbit." In these 2 verses, he informs that the moon is in the orbit, just as he informs that it is in the heavens. And since Allah has informed us that we see the heavens, as he said, He who created 7 heavens in layers, you do not see any inconsistency in the creation of the Most Merciful. So return your sight. Do you see any breaks? Then return your sight twice again. Your sight will return to you humbled and weary. And he said, have they not looked at the sky above them, how we built it and adorned it, and it has no cracks? And other similar texts indicate that the sky is visible, and that which is visible is the orbit. This indicates that the two are one and the same. What a catastrophe in knowledge! But if he got the earth-round thing right, why couldn't he nail the orbit too? The answer is simple. The Greeks hadn't figured that part out yet. They only managed the sphere thing. Geocentrism, the idea that Earth is fixed at the center and everything else circles it, was the mainstream model until the 16th century. Funny thing, when the so-called Sheikh of Islam and Messenger of Allah couldn't figure it out, some Greeks had already worked it out as early as the 3rd century BCE. Almost nobody believed them. Meanwhile, today, this Muslim apologist quietly sneaks in a modern meaning of orbit that the Quran itself never had. When people hear orbit, they picture planets gliding through empty space, held by invisible forces nobody in the 7th century even imagined. But none of that exists in the Quranic worldview. No vast universe, no empty space, no invisible cosmic machinery, just what they could see from the desert floor. So, my Muslim friends, if this doesn't scream 7th century cosmology dressed up as divine revelation, then logic and I have done all we can here.
If you look in the same Quran, in the 23rd chapter, in the 14th verse, it talks about the development of the embryo and the stages of development inside the womb. Now, a man without an ultrasound machine, without an MRI machine, without any medical equipment, how could he know how the clot clings to the side of the womb, how that clot develops into a lump, how it develops flesh and then bones, and then the muscles that develop around the bones? How could he know those details? Impossible.
You can't present this as a miracle while ignoring the elephant in the room. Long before Islam, multiple ancient thinkers, Galen among them, had already described nearly identical stages, from semen to a blood-like substance to an unshaped fleshy mass, and finally organ formation. Now let's just read the verse. Then we developed the drop into a clinging clot, then developed the clot into a lump of flesh, then developed the lump into bones, then clothed the bones with flesh. Then we brought it into being as a new creation. First, clinging clot is a modern apologetic translation. The original Arabic word is alaka, which does not uniquely mean something attached to the womb. Classical Arabic lexicons and early commentators describe it as clotted blood, something leech-like or a blood-like substance. But when it has been filled with blood and heart, brain, and liver are still unarticulated and unshaped, yet have by now a certain solidity and considerable size, this is the second period. The substance of the fetus has the form of flesh and no longer the form of semen. Accordingly, you would find that Hippocrates too no longer calls such a form semen, but, as was said, fetus. Wow, how did Galen figure that out without an ultrasound machine, without an MRI machine? Simple. Ancient people observed miscarriages, abortions, and dissected animals. As for, then clothed the bones with flesh. In modern embryology, development is overlapping and concurrent, not strictly sequential. So at least with how you framed it, you are telling us the Quran doesn't agree with modern science. And now the third period of gestation has come. After nature has made outlines of all the organs and the substances of a semen is used up, the time has come for nature to articulate the organs precisely and to bring all the parts to completion. Thus has caused flesh to grow on and around all the bones. There's a debate over what even counts as bone at that stage, but since this apologist presents his miracles with remarkable laziness, we'll have to save that discussion for a future video. So the remaining question is, how did a 7th century man know this? I have 2 answers. First, a question. What's more likely? That the same man who explained sunrise by telling us the sun goes off somewhere, hides, prostrates, and awaits instructions on when to rise again, just happened to receive flawless biological knowledge straight from the creator of the universe. Or that, living in a region laced with trade routes and sitting near centers of Hellenistic learning, he absorbed the standard embryological ideas of his era, the very ones Galen taught, and wove them into his revelation. One of these explanations requires a miracle, the other requires geography. Common sense does the rest. Second, The works of Galen, Aristotle, and others were indeed already known and circulating in the Near East long before Islam.
In the same Quran, it talks about how the depths of the ocean have a darkness that is unfathomable. And under that unfathomable darkness, there are waves beneath the ocean. How could he have known that? To see the waves on top of the ocean, yes, we can see that. But to deep dive without any equipment, without ever having gone to an ocean, knowing that there are waves underneath the ocean, something that we didn't realize until very recently.
Okay, pause. Could you at least put in some effort and show that ancient sailors, pearl divers, fishermen, and coastal cultures couldn't have known that the sea gets darker with depth and that water moves violently beneath the surface? Or should we just take your word for it? Let's look at the verse. It's a simile. It's not an oceanography paper. It says the state of an unbeliever is like being in a deep, dark sea with waves and clouds. The whole point is to paint a scary, chaotic, metaphorical picture of spiritual confusion. The verse literally ends with the punchline, and whoever Allah does not bless with light will have no light. So, throw out poetic imagery. If later science finds something vaguely similar, it's a miracle. If it doesn't, it was just a metaphor. It's a completely risk-free strategy. With enough metaphors, it would be statistically shocking not to hit something that resembles reality eventually. More importantly, the waves in the verse are described as covering the sea, not existing deep beneath it. That's why classical Islamic commentators understood this as successive surface waves, not hidden internal waves. Unfortunately, the Quran gives us no technical details whatsoever, and that's a problem with the text itself.
Knowing that the mountains are pegs that go into the earth as they go above the earth without any drilling equipment, without any geology experience, how could he have known that?
Well, here's a shocking explanation that may surprise absolutely no one. He used his eyes and his brain. Massive things have bases, trees have roots, walls have foundations, tents have pegs. It is the most basic, intuitive analogy a human, especially a desert-dwelling one, could make. Saint Jerome, from the 4th century, commenting on the Book of Jonah, writes, "No one doubts that the ocean covered Jonah's head, that he went down to the roots of mountains and came to the depths of the earth by which as bars and columns by the will of God the earthly sphere is supported." Jerome is not doing geology. He's using symbolic language common in the ancient world, where the earth was pictured as having pillars, foundations, bars, and depths. Big thing up top probably means big thing down below. It's common sense. Now the Quran calls them pegs. A peg is a separate object, pointed, hammered down from above into the ground. That is not how mountains work. They form from below, through tectonic forces, folding, uplift, and crustal thickening. Their bases are broad and continuous. They're not separate pegs stuck in the Earth's crust. They are the Earth's crust. Look at the image you showed. Be honest. Do those look like pegs? Or do they look like roots? Wide, branching, continuous structures. Funny enough, Jerome called them roots 3 centuries earlier. So why pegs? Because a man in the desert thinks in desert terms.
Could he guess every time and get it right? That is mathematically impossible.
Sorry, I'm still processing the sun's orbit where it goes away, parks under a throne, politely asks its boss for permission, and then comes back up in the morning. But yes, please tell me more about mathematical impossibility.
In the Quran, in the 30th chapter, in the same book, he predicts something that is historically correct about the defeat of the Byzantine Romans at the hands of the Persians, and how long it will take 3 to 9 years for them to make a comeback and defeat the Persians.
Short answer, it was written down after the events it describes. The real miracle would be proving it wasn't.
How would he have known that? At the time of the defeat, when these verses were revealed to him by the creator of mankind, it was impossible to predict something that everybody thought was never going to happen. The Romans had lost Constantinople, they had lost Jerusalem, they had lost Damascus, they were defeated. And the Quran said that they will make a comeback, a prophecy that came true.
The Byzantines never lost Constantinople, not to the Persians. Yes, they lost some territory, but they still had resources, a functioning state, a professional army, a powerful navy, and Constantinople itself, again, not lost. Empires losing and regaining land was completely normal in late antiquity. A comeback wasn't unthinkable, it was plausible. Sure, predicting a comeback might have been risky, but that's exactly why this prophecy was only finalized after the fact. You're holding up your own tradition as proof, but if the verse had been wrong, it wouldn't have survived into the Uthmanic Quran. It would have been tossed in the fire with the rest.
That same prophet had miracles that were observed by millions of people around the world. Miracles that we can show till today. What is that? The Quran itself, a miracle that is living in front of us. A book that is memorized by people across the world who don't even speak the language, that is preserved word by word, letter by letter.
Memorization and preservation are human achievements, not miracles. You showed no proof that they are. It's just human effort, motivated by religious orders, not some supernatural intervention. Sure, it's impressive that people can memorize a book, but let's not pretend this defies the laws of reality.
He had physical miracles, like the splitting of the moon. Can a man on his own split the moon? No, but the man who has the power of God behind him can. And the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, did. And we have eyewitness accounts from his followers and also from his enemies, from the people who were Arabs and non-Arab, from people in Mecca and Medina and other geographical locations that were eyewitnesses to such a thing, more eyewitnesses than most of the history that you believe in from that time.
Eyewitnesses from Mecca, Medina, and apparently the entire universe. Stories, my friend, are not evidence, they're claims. In this case, with zero contemporary, independent, or physical evidence for the event, using Islamic tradition as your proof for non-Muslims is a special kind of logic. Let me explain why it's completely useless to anyone not already in the club. The hadith collection process has its own internal rules for deciding what's a true story. And those rules are, to put it mildly, spectacularly biased. If the story shows Muhammad as anything less than morally perfect, intellectually supreme, or prophetically flawless, reject it immediately. So, what survives the filter? Only the stories that paint a spotless, infallible, divinely backed picture. Take 5 seconds. Think about this, and then try not to laugh at using your filtered stories as proof. Seriously, it's ridiculous. Now about that image that he showed. The Cheraman Perumal story is a late legend, not contemporary history.
So now you tell me, if these miracles don't prove to you that this is a true message, what will?
So, the miracles we've witnessed in this video are a sun that clocks in and out under a throne, mountains that are pegs, oceans with metaphorical waves, a miraculously preserved book memorized by humans, a moon that split on command, and a post-event empire comeback prophecy. Yeah, I'm still not impressed. Thanks for watching.